posted by 6 seconds. Oh. They always do.
You need Sarah or someone of this one?
Just bring Bode more in.
No, you can.
Apparently they're ignoring me. See things. So, started. Can I get a motion to review and approve the minutes? So moved. Second. We have one? Actually, wait. 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. What are we, 9? 7? Okay, yeah, we're good. Most of our quorum was still walking in. So, correspondence.
No, they ain't done.
Philmont Volunteer Fire Company, BLS First Responder. New medical directors for Town of Corinth is Doug Gerling. Waynesburg is Dr. Daly. Moreau is going to Christopher Case. And reports, academic.
Okay, so we had a discussion on EP3 and where that's going, more to come. I think pretty much everybody is here that heard that. We also talked about Assemblywoman Fahey has been very supportive for EMS. She's pushing to have the direct pay bill go through. Hopefully that will happen. Dr. Daly, myself, Dr. Cordy, Steve Kroll all went to the Rural Health Committee meeting and gave testimony. It was a long process, but at least they did listen and did ask for additional information. A whole bunch of courses. If anybody wants to list, they can see me. I'll give it to them for the summer, and that's basically it.
Okay. Remsco, I was covering a shift, so I can't report on that. But Steve Kroll, the chair of Remsco, is here, so I'd like to introduce him to the few people who may not know him. And Steve can tell us what happened at the Remsco.
Oh, wow. Okay, what happened at the Remsco?
Perfect timing.
Let's see, I didn't know I was giving a report. If I say anything that's duplicative, please stop me.
We just started, so you don't repeat anything.
Oh, okay. Well, a couple things. We've put together a group to talk about the ET3 program that's made up of provider agencies that have volunteered to engage in a conversation about whether or not we should be part of the ET3 program here in this region. It's similar to what's happening in the Rochester region, where the Remsco has convened providers to talk about whether they want to do the program together. We've quickly realized that it's more complicated than not, and it may be a leap too far for us, perhaps. But I think everybody around the table recognizes that payment systems are moving in that direction. And even if we're not going to have an application for the ET3 program that is made up of a group of providers from this region, that we ought to spend the next year or two working together and think about how do we build the systems that are necessary to fit into a alternate payment model where we'd be reimbursed for not only transportation but for treating people at home and doing treated release. So there were 9 agencies in that group. We will start meeting on a semi-regular basis, and we'll open it up to all the agencies, and I imagine many more agencies will join this conversation. And it'll be open to both the CMAC, the Remac, the physician component, as well as to the administrative and management side. So that's one thing. At this Remsco, we passed a new sexual harassment policy that is compliant with the new New York State law. That policy will be coming to all of you as members of the Remac, because since the Remac is a subcommittee of the Remsco, it applies not only to the employees of the organization, but also applies to all board members and all committee members. So I'm sure all of you that sit on other organizational boards and are employed in other places have had to receive the new policies and get get training. We are obliged to the same law here. So that will be coming out for all of you to review, and asking everyone on the the organization to participate in the training. Tim's been working on the training. It's going to be online, so it'll be something you can do briefly, and we're going to be required by law to do that every year. The other thing we announced at the last REMSCO meeting is something that Dr. McHugh and I have been talking about together. I don't know, Rob, if you were to talk about this later, the October 28th program, or do you want me to mention it, or?
Sure.
Okay. We've been talking about opportunities to bring the REMSCO and the Remac together, because at the state level, the CMAC and SEMSCO meet back to back, and so there's a lot of cross-pollination between the mission of the physician community that's working on pre-hospital care policy, and then the mission of the administrative types, or the that get together. That's a matter of logistics, because people come from all over the state. We put them back to back, but there's a lot of mixing of ideas and thinking, and a lot of the best thinking happens outside of those meetings when the CMAC members and SEMSCO members get together and talk. So in October, we picked a date, which is October 28th. It's a Monday. And that's the day of the October REMSCO meeting, to invite the REMSCO and Remac to have a joint program in the afternoon. So we're looking at late afternoon. We'll probably serve dinner or something. And we're going to put together a program around healthcare reform and how it affects and impacts EMS. Invite some speakers in to talk about that. Perhaps get some speakers from the national level or regional level that'll come in, so it's not just us talking among ourselves, but also look for that as an opportunity for us to share discussions, so maybe some panel discussions. So we're talking about a 1 or 2 hour program, and we're hoping to get both members, realizing that most of you probably have these things on your calendar for a full year, and not everybody can, but if you put October 20th on your calendar, we'll be getting to save the date out soon. We're hoping to get as many members of the REMSCO. We're hoping this room is full, and we have a really robust conversation about some healthcare reform topics, and that leads us to wanting to do this type of conversation more often in the future. So those are 3 highlights from the last REMSCO meeting.
Thanks. CMAC, back to you, Doc.
So CMAC did meet today. Just BLS protocols go into effect in August. If you guys want to look at them, they're on the state website. There was some discussion on the previous meeting about a proposal to recommend EMS as an essential service. That sort of segued into what we talked about, which was the meeting with Assemblywoman Fahey, and from there going to the Committee on Rural Health Care. That sort of died out as an essential service resolution, as no one knew exactly what that would do, and probably wouldn't do a whole lot for us, truthfully. So I think the other pathway we took was a better pathway. That basically is it.
SEMSCO? Like,
SEMSCO?
oh, there was no meeting? Okay.
SEMSCO was not, should not
I just went on all the time. Tom?
We got an update on CARES. First of all, we got introduced to Jess, who's going to be working with Deb hand in hand now. So she was running our meeting, very helpful, very pleasant. We're glad that she's here with us. She updated us on CARES. Then one of the ongoing projects was to set up a CPR marathon. That got pushed back to February, which is Heart Month. Then another ongoing project was the provider impressions list that Paul and Art have been doing. Paul gave us a great presentation on what they finally come up with, and we're going to start moving that forward through the committees now to try to advance that. And then I think that was about it. We got some other updates on the pediatric coordinators. There's about 15 agencies that I think have stepped forward to place somebody in that role. I think that's about it for now. We talked about another ongoing project to talk to agencies about their QI process and maybe present a few ongoing topics for QI, but it's still in the early stages now. So.
Agency updates? No
there is an ALS upgrade, state police, so you go from advanced to paramedic level. Did you say about that, Don, or?
Yeah, basically, if you guys don't know them, Art Cactus is back there, photographs, Jason Christie from the state police. They're members of the SWORD, which is Special Operations Team. Currently they're at advanced level. They want to go up to paramedic level. They will not be treating the general public other than if somebody is specifically hurt at one of their operations. It's basically to cover the team specifically. There's an East and West team. And Jason, you'll have the equipment for the East team, and Brian will have the equipment for the West team. They have all their paperwork. They didn't realize that they had to send it in beforehand, so we didn't realize it didn't get here in time for the meeting. But I don't know if you guys want to bring anything else up? Anything else about that I didn't mention? You guys have any questions at all?
Just know that we're not a substitution, we're an augmentation of the medical support program. That's basically it. We do not, our standard protocol is if we treat anybody, a civilian, we immediately call for an EMS. We do not RMA anybody. We do not transport anybody civilian-wise unless it's a dire emergency or when an unsecure setting. But again, it's just an augmentation of what you provide, not a substitution at all.
And I'm functioning as their medical director.
Yeah.
Does your staff work in EMS outside of your current role?
Some of the gentlemen that are non-SOAR members, but are EMS troopers, we call them EMS troopers, they do. Mostly like him and I, we are full-time operators on the team, so we do most permanent or tactical operators.
Yeah, and the paramedics that are in the state police have been paramedics prior to becoming state troopers. So they've been either in helicopter, in HEMS with LifeNet. We have a LifeNet paramedic. We have a bunch of ground ambulance, professional firefighters that are paramedics as well. So all the paramedics that are state police now have been field providers prior to coming out of state police.
Is giving your role out the most crucial?
Right.
Any other comments?
What about online status now?
As far as?
I mean, they're from so many different regions. They
Just
cover
like-
so many regions.
I don't think it's a question here. I think it falls the same way that LifeNet does. So they're based in Albany, therefore their online status would be here.
But they would basically be able to provide care throughout the state.
Right. The only place they'd have to worry about is whether or not there's a protocol that they need to worry about. It's a little different down in on Long Island. But let's face it, the reality is they'll be operating under our protocol regardless of where they are. The controlled substance plan will be monitored throughout here through Don.
Any other questions?
So is the designation like paramedic first response, similar like Ski Wyndham? Is that kind of how we're classifying this? I'm just wondering what.
Yeah, they're paramedic.
Yeah.
They would be
The paramedic,
ALSFR. Yeah.
paramedic first response would be basically the designation.
Any other comments?
I think while this is in discussion, I think it's important, you know, we have always made it the policy that every ALS agency needs to carry all the ALS stuff, right? And I think we need to look at that policy for reasonableness, but I think it needs to be a case-by-case basis. I was down at the Times Union Center the other day and opened up their drug box to discover norepi. I can't think of a setting in which a Times Union paramedic is going to be initiating a norepinephrine drip. And I think giving them an exception to that would be a very reasonable thing for us to do, but again, on a case-by-case basis. And I think that one of the things that may pertain from time to time would be having paramedics that are traveling in austere environments not carrying oxygen cylinders, for example, being able to carry albuterol in a metered dose inhaler, as long as they have training for it. Never requiring them to use it, but having a drug that could be added to the formulary in a different administration setting to assist in the process of them providing care. So I think we need a little bit more flexibility to some of our existing policies.
Would Don, as medical director, be able to give them the latitude to adjust what they take for each specific mission?
I wouldn't do it that way. I think the latitude for each specific mission, probably not, but what they carry in general would be a reasonable thing to do. And I think that that would be something that an agency medical director should talk to the systems medical director and then make that change. If the agency medical director happens to be the systems medical director, then I think it would be a good idea to talk to the chair of the Remac. But we then formally issue a letter that says the following things do not have to be carried because it's not reasonable.
So do you want to make that as a motion, Mike?
Let's make that, let's pass your motion and then move on to the next.
Wait a minute, I'm just trying to get clarification from our office, and I just, if you guys are VLSFR currently?
We're ALSFR.
You're an ALSFR already? Okay,
We're AMT. We're at the AMT.
okay, I just wanted to be sure you didn't have to go through the CON process again, as far as an agency code.
Director Greenberg already checked on that for us. He said-
Oh, that's why, you're the reason we had to find all that data this morning. Okay, all right, that's all I just wanted to be sure of, that's what I'm trying to.
Actually, they already had a CON. Yeah, the state police already has a statewide ALS CON because of the lifeguard program.
But that's different.
Same agency, just a different branch, of the same agency.
State police have a different, there's different codes, I believe.
Doesn't matter.
So,
Plus, it's
I don't know
okay.
if somebody wants to make a motion
That's why I'm
to
checking.
accept them.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. I guess I can second it. Okay, is it better? Fine.
I'm not doing
No, I can.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you should.
One second. Okay, one second.
Okay, which motion we second?
So.
He's seconding.
One second, you made the motion.
Just put out the motion again, word for word, you good?
So the motion to approve them as an ALS first responder service?
At the paramedic level.
At the paramedic level, yeah. No, second? No. Okay. And then a motion to.
Let's just finish the
Let's
first.
finish this one first.
All in favor of the first? How do you want to word the second motion?
That we be allowed to amend the policy that requires all ALS equipment on every paramedic ambulance or first response vehicle as appropriate for the mission at hand. And this be approved by the regional medical director at the request of an agency medical director.
There's a process for putting a waiver, and it actually goes through the state.
There's no policy, there's no state policy that requires ALS equipment, it's a regional policy.
There's certain ALS equipment that's required for
Yes.
ALSFR.
Yes. There was, so let's change that.
Do you see where I'm saying?
Yeah, let's change that. For medication or equipment as required by the region to be modified by the regional medical director, or to be modified by an agency medical director with the approval of the regional medical director.
You got that?
How's that going to interact with collaborative protocols?
Not at all.
It's not a standard of care.
I don't think there's a standard of care for somebody that has a transport time of 3 minutes or less to carrying norepinephrine.
I'm not arguing that.
No, but that's the.
We're going to start ditching
that's the
stuff. I
example
pushed
of it.
calcium chloride twice, and I'd like to get rid of it also, so, thanks.
But, well, and here's the answer. So, no, you can't.
I know you were the one who ordered it one of the times. You died.
When your ambulance is on your back, we can have a discussion.
Right.
Can you shoot me an email on that language so I can put it in the minutes?
I just put a little bit more discussion too with that. I'm all for the concept. I just think we have to be careful that we start off that everyone has to carry everything until there is waivers by the medical director submitted, subtracting this, that, or the other. I'm totally for the concept of decreasing all the things that we carry and don't use. It's good financial-wise. It's good so you don't need a Sherpa to carry any extra bags that you don't use. But I think that we have to have an understanding that as someone is made an EMT advanced level, that as a paramedic, carry everything until your medical director says you're done, and it's been approved.
And also that has to be approved by the regional medical director as well, so there's
Correct.
attached to that.
So who's approving this? From the Remac or the Remsco?
The system is medical, right?
Unless he's one and the same.
In which case it would be the chair. Right.
There's always
Basically
somebody
saying,
else.
I can't decide people aren't gonna do things unilaterally. And you could be two docs saying, this isn't okay.
I think we should just have it come to the Remac. I really don't, I don't like the idea in the first place. I like the concept behind it, but we're moving away from what we spent all this time in trying to get a unified minimum level of care. And we're basically saying that we're just not gonna follow that. That, some of it makes perfect sense, I get it, but let's look at that across the region or across the state if that's what we're moving to. We're moving in two very different directions here. One hand, we're saying, let's go towards a statewide protocol, minimum standards, and the other one, we're saying, well, except for these reasons.
What you're saying makes a lot of sense. An agency capability is an agency capability. However, if I deploy a paramedic unit at a special event, and I want to use, you know, let's say we just think about the things that might present at that event. We might have anaphylaxis, might come upon an opioid overdose, might have an asthma attack, may very well have a cardiac arrest. That's what I want people to be able to act on in most of the units that are out there. So that would be a very reasonable standard to set for first response paramedic units within that deployment. I think that would be what I would say more than anything else in terms of how to do this. For, you know, for something like the Times Union Center, right, who has the need from time to time to use controlled substances specifically because of behavioral emergencies, it doesn't make sense for them to drop to the advanced level. But they also, having the complete formulary that we carry everywhere else because of their almost immediate backup from Albany Fire, doesn't make sense from a fiscally, from a setting of fiscal prudence. So I think the question is whether or not somebody makes the case of it. You make the case of it, absolutely. If they don't make the case for it, no.
As long as we all understand that we're actually talking about waiving the minimum standards.
In a defined setting.
Right.
But that's what you're talking about doing.
And I would say if there's a disagreement between the agency and the region, it comes to the MAC. If they both agree on it, fine. If there's any disagreement, then it'll get bumped up. So it's gotta make sense for them to be doing it.
We're already in a position where agencies can say that they want less than the formulary based on historical norms, or more than the formulary based on the historical norms. And that's something which is just literally a letter. This is actually bumping it up from just a letter.
Less quantity, but not less medications.
Sure.
I don't like it. I don't know how to put it, I don't like it. I get where you're coming at, but I don't think that this should be done quickly like this. I think this needs to be discussed more. Because if we're gonna take a look at this and really say, you know, we're tying in things like, and Bruce is right, you know, financially, this is gonna make a lot of sense for a lot of people out there. But if we're gonna do stuff like this, we need to look at call stats retrospectively and go, what have we never, ever, ever used? I like hair traction splits. Or I like traction splits, maybe not hair, but anyhow. So, what have we never used? And if you want to make a case for dropping some of the things that we're using because we don't use them, I'm completely on board with that. But if we're going to turn around and say, well, these people are going to be standing in this certain situation and probably won't do something else, we're only creating more of a problem for a profession to say that now that paramedic is not equal to that paramedic, is not equal to that paramedic. You know, I get what you're saying, but I don't like it.
Well, you have an ambulance to tote all that stuff around in, right? I mean, we're talking
I
about
don't.
situations, oh, you don't?
No, I'm a fly car paramedic.
Well,
I don't
okay,
think
fine,
I'm a little
fine,
paramedic, sure,
right.
but
I don't think he's talking about taking stuff out of an ambulance or a fly car. I think he's talking about these little like these events and
I get it.
this other stuff, which is
Mobile
completely
paramedic
different though.
units
I
that
don't
are
think you're gonna
human-based.
sit I don't think you're gonna sit and say, oh, Gildan wants to take calcium chloride out because they don't use it. That's not, I don't think that's what he's talking about.
But you're creating the ability to have that happen.
But then, that's where the director comes in and says, absolutely not, that's not happening.
How do they have the authority to do that?
They just said, that's
We
what,
just gave
they
it
just
to
said, they just gave them the
Well,
authority,
that's
the
what
medical.
I'm saying, I don't think that should happen.
So
See what the
basically from your perspective is, whatever your agency is, you have to show up with all of this stuff.
There's an expectation of care.
But that care will still come, it's just coming from whoever's backing them up.
In this particular case, these particular cases, sure.
But that's the point, we go case by case.
Right, it's not.
I mean, that's the point of this motion was, it's not a blanket statement saying we can chop stuff out willy-nilly as long as you show you haven't used calcium chloride in the last 5 years. It's that we have a specific scenario, an enclosed venue where we have close backup. It makes sense, and this is an appropriate measure. Saves cost, saves time. You know, everybody's on board with this. We're not making a blanket statement to say, you know, everybody start looking at your calls and see what you can cut out to save money. But I don't think that we're going that far. I think that the motion reflects that.
Okay. And should that motion be reflective to just that agency specifically?
Yeah,
Not open Pandora's box.
It's not opening Pandora's, I don't think you're opening Pandora's box. I think, you know, if Times Union writes a letter that says, we don't believe that we need to carry norepi, and here are the reasons. And, you know, we read it, approve it, and I think it's a very reasonable thing, not for us to approve each one of these here, but to notify each one of these here, just as a agency requests for alternatives, right? So on there, say, hey, this one was approved. It doesn't mean that everybody else in the region can suddenly say, well, they're not, so I'm not, right?
Would it make sense to, once these amendments are approved, to then notify the MAC that this happened? So that way, worst case, the next MAC meeting, someone can make a motion to, no, they need to have it, we take the whole MAC to vote on. Go ahead, sir.
Just so you know, for us, for what we operate, two things we'll do. One thing is, if we have to interact with traditional EMS services, we'll do a face-to-face, and we'll let them know our capabilities for that operation, what we can and cannot do. Also, for an operation, we would, even if we had everything that you guys had, we would not be able to use it all the time, because we could either be working in the woods, working in a building, or something like that. So, but if we know we're short, we're gonna like supplement like by doing a face-to-face and letting you know that, so you could be prepared.
And again, just to be clear, I have no issue with the state police going to the paramedic level. I've actually kind of wondered for 20 years why you guys weren't. So I'm completely in support of that. I think the way that this is happening, it leaves an avenue open for other agencies to use this.
Well, let's divide things here. These guys have already been approved, so that's.
Yeah, they have, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
So this is a totally separate thing that's talking about
Right.
other agencies. I mean, I think what Mike has brought up is probably reasonable. I think how your concerns are, there needs to be some safety net. So I think if somebody wants to take something out of some agency's box, then it has to go through two people. And then I think it should be brought to the MAC at the next meeting to let the MAC know this occurred. And if somebody has a concern about that, then we can vote on it at that point. I think that's probably a reasonable way to go. That's where your concerns are. I mean, I don't really think it's gonna change care in the area. I don't think all of a sudden Colony's gonna come and say, well, you know, we haven't used a whole lot of glucagon, so we'll stock one for the whole town. That's all we're gonna do. Or,
Can't do that?
Well, no, I think, John, I think that's a perfect example, because we've had agencies that have come to us before with that example exactly. And what we've said is, no. Just because you haven't had a problem in a year of getting an IV,
the chance is still there that you might, and
Right.
having a patient with prolonged hypoglycemia is bad medicine?
Right.
No. So, perfect example.
So, I'll make a, I mean, I will second the motion if you want to bring it up to the, for a vote. I think it's probably, somebody has more discussion on it.
I think we should bring it up to the vote.
So I'll second.
All in favor? Any opposed?
Do we have a quorum to actually vote on? I
Yeah,
don't
we
see a
said-
whole lot of hands going either direction.
Who made the motion? Whether they voted or not, is a whole other story.
We do a roll call vote?
Well, I abstained because I came in late on the discussion, so I don't know what we're voting on, so, just so.
Okay, so for the record, who actually made that motion?
Who made the motion?
Dr. Daly made the
Dr.
motion.
Daly.
There you
I
go.
second the motion.
Thank you.
Motion was to allow the region to amend the required equipment for agency on a case-by-case basis. The medical director would have to approve it, the regional medical director would have to agree with it, and then it would be notified to the MAC afterwards.
The regionally required, not.
The regionally required equipment, yes, or medications.
So Sam, in other words, if they decide, as Mike brought up, are they ever gonna use Norepi at the Times Union Center? Would they ever have time to hang a Norepi drip before Albany Fire would be there? It seems somewhat silly that they have to stock it. Perhaps for the state police team, maybe it would make more sense to have an albuterol inhaler rather than nebulized albuterol, which required them to carry a tank with them wherever they went. Those kind of things.
Is there a specific request that came from a specific agency?
Not yet, Mike was making a general.
We had just approved the state police to go to paramedic level, so that kind of.
Great.
Brought this conversation.
Okay.
So do we want to vote again, or do we have enough votes?
I mean, a roll call? I did.
Show it.
Okay, all in favor?
You want me to read what actually I wrote, written down? I've been typing it, I'm sorry. Agency medical directors may apply for changes to the ALS required medication or equipment to the regional required. Regionally mandated ALS required medication or equipment if they believe it makes reasonable sense given agency operational setting. Application process is the regional systems medical director unless that person is the agency director. In that case, the Remac chair will serve as the second position.
Missed the third part. So you need to do then it comes to
Oh.
the max, so you gotta have that last piece.
Each application will be brought to the next Remac meeting.
As notification, not
So
specifically.
just, when I ask a question, I know there's a motion on the floor, but if for some reason this committee, after the fact, felt the decisions that were made were inappropriate, what is the recourse? Can that decision be reversed by this committee for the future after that initial incident and occurrence that is brought here, or is it brought here only for informational purposes?
I mean, from my perspective, if I brought something to this table and every physician looked at me and said, Daly, what were you thinking? My answer would be, I was wrong.
I would
So-
say brought to the Remac for final approval.
Yeah, I
But
think
the
that's very
operational is
reasonable that way.
If
Yeah.
both directors were in agreement.
Yeah.
If there's no agreement, then it has to wait for the.
So this body is basically going to certify that decision. And if it doesn't like the decision, it can be brought back to the status quo. That's what we're saying. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
It gives it flexibility, plus the body still has the power.
Why not just have the body approve it?
Because
We don't meet again until September.
it's a retroactive,
Something comes
it's
up
a
in
time,
August that we need
timeliness
to deal
issue
with.
is what it is. It's a timeliness issue.
So that seems reasonable, we'll just safeguard that. So everybody's
Yeah.
comfortable with us.
Since this is getting wordy, do we want to just type this up, put it out for review, and then formally approve it in the next meeting.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Okay. That makes really good sense.
Tabled?
Yeah. The table, and we'll send it out for everybody to look at. How about we continue the motion, we're gonna, the motion to make a policy,
Postpone it.
and then we'll, yeah, we'll postpone it.
Motion to postpone it.
Somebody said.
Oh, we never counted all the votes.
We never counted.
Hey, Rob. The other motion actually would be for the approval of the addition of albuterol meter dose inhalers to the regional formulary.
Okay.
We should be able to do that.
That I think we should be able to do.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Hang on, discussion, only if they carry aero chambers with it.
Agreed.
Okay.
Okay.
They are one and the same.
Okay, back up.
Yeah, you lost me.
Sounds a new motion.
So we're postponing the
We're
motion.
postponing the long motion, making a short motion.
Okay.
Short motion is the addition of albuterol meter dose inhalers, the regionally approved formulary. They must include an aero chamber for administration.
Do we have a second for that? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
And paramedics in the room who don't know, 4 puffs on a meter dose inhaler equals 1 albuterol now.
I'm glad you bring that up, because that was my next question, is will there be
Yeah.
an educational requirement before an agency can switch to that? Because there has to be something that educates the paramedics on when it's appropriate to use and when it's not, and that they're not interchangeable.
No one else is going to it because they're really expensive still.
But to answer your question, 4 puffs through an aero chamber equals 1
Hey,
albuterol.
that's great, but,
Actually, they're more effective as long as they're moving air.
and that's great, but that's just the people in this room that know that. And if an agency does go to that, there has to be an educational requirement built into that motion. So if we're gonna allow that, if you're gonna allow that, you need to build in that there's gotta be a requirement for an educational component. Too many things get rolled out into the street that just get dumped in our laps and we show up Monday morning, here it is, figure it out.
No, Gio, that's actually an excellent suggestion.
You probably volunteered yourself to do it, Gio.
Absolutely. Give me about, I'm pretty busy for the next 19 years, but I'll get right on it. So, yeah. Just a suggestion. So can you amend that to the motion that you just made? I can't officially amend anything, so amend whatever you want, and so that that's included.
Actually, Mr. Kroll, who's sitting behind me, who's serving as our honorary sergeant at arms today, would be very angry if we tried to amend a motion that's already been passed.
There you go, too late. So
But-
motion
But a
to,
more important motion would be that for any additions to the formulary, there be an educational component, which is required for every paramedic that will use that medication.
Any
Or EMS provider who will use that medication.
Especially that-
What?
Especially for albuterol, any provider.
Yes.
did you get that?
Nope.
Play the video back.
Can we get a second on that motion?
You got 4 motions going, right? No. Yeah, not according to my notes.
We've approved all the other ones.
Just stenographer for this meeting.
So are you familiar with the ethical routine of who's on first?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion on that?
What?
Those. Okay. EPCRs, multiple agencies upgraded to NEPS version 3.4. Public access defibrillation. New York State Assembly, Zone 5, Morgan Stanley, Albany Latham, New York State Department of Tax and Finance, Capital Air BOCES, Express Scripts, Empire State Aeroscience Museum, Elderberg Workshop, Cannon Funeral Home, Equinox Incorporated, Town of Greenport, State Comptroller, Sinclair Broadcasting, Tokyo Electron, U.S. Holdings, and Citizens Option Camp Little, sorry. New business.
So he's having a conversation now, but, we can apply as a region to allow services to follow the FDA's ruling that medications can be extended. The system works as the service approaches the Remac, which then sends a letter to, or the region, which then sends a letter to the state to say that they're going to be doing this. So that's what we would like to do, so that for this, we can just blanket the region, can follow the extended expiration dates. Any question on that? Okay. So, can someone make a motion that we send a letter to the CMAC saying that?
Are we sending a letter to CMAC or to Mary?
Goes to Mary.
Oh, so Mary, who then goes to CMAC, sorry, I forgot that step.
So is the letter addressed to Mary or addressed to Don?
Either way, when they've come in, Don will attest to this, we've had them in, one wasn't even a letter, and then the others have been letters addressed to, one was to Ryan, one was to me.
About two Mary, comma Don.
Yeah. It's just a matter of being able to track it in the system.
Somebody make a motion that we do the letter?
We have a lethargic group today.
Well, the motion has been made.
Anybody
It
second?
comes as a seconded motion at the academic committee. right?
Okay, so we just need to,
So.
all in favor?
I don't know if I wrote the damn letter.
Anyone opposed? Okay. So, Remac vice chair, we only one person stepped forward to be willing to do it. So, can I vote to approve Heidi Cordy as vice chair?
We need a motion or we also, just have to vote?
Well, she's got no one else for it, so.
Okay, well, I'll make a motion, we.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone else want the job?
Was that done under duress?
It's being recorded, I can't tell you.
Mike, Fast DD and Nitro?
Sorry. We already had this conversation.
So, FastED first. There are a number of agencies regionally who are using the FastED app very successfully. And thank you to those that are. For those that are not, please encourage folks to use it. We really are seeing appropriate patients being transported to the appropriate hospitals, from what I can tell so far. But what we're going to do is look to do a study on a broader basis, both to compare the FastED scores that are being obtained in the field with the NIH stroke score that's being obtained in the hospital, and also to look at door-in, door-out times for transferred strokes from comprehensive centers to, from primary stroke centers to comprehensive stroke centers. Bottom line is that we want the right patients in the right place, and we don't want all the patients at the comprehensive center. Hopefully this information will be able to guide us towards the improved process that'll impact more patients than just stroke patients. In particular, that door-in, door-out process on transfers can sometimes be a little bit clunky, and I think this will give us a chance to look at it a little bit more closely. So we'll be working on putting together a proposal for the Northeastern Cerebrovascular Consortium to work with Ellis, hopefully St. Peter. Sam, unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to discuss this. I sent the information to Frank. And across the other hospitals in the region, just to make sure that indeed we're doing the best we possibly can inside the Mission Lifeline program we're already all participating in. So excited about that opportunity.
Can you resend to me?
Before you get off that subject, as medical control physicians, we can help. This is a new thing for our paramedics, for our EMTs. I've had many a phone call where I say, and what did the FastED show? And they go, oh, I forgot. And I will tell you, just if you ask them just once, they will never make that mistake again. So we can help teach.
Well, I'll tell you, on our side of the river, we're still getting
Which side of the
strokes.
river you on?
Yeah, I'm all over the place now. In Troy, we are still seeing strokes that should not show up at our facility quite often.
So how does any of this ever make it to the field provider? I belong to 3 different agencies, and I associate with about a dozen more, and I could pick any paramedics at random and probably never even heard of FastED, much less ever downloaded the app on their phone. There is nothing that comes from this board or Remo that is a required update or is even a newsletter or anything that ever makes it to the street level paramedic. Whether they're a practicing paramedic as a fire / non-transport, fire transport, commercial, it does not get through. So you guys talk about this stuff all day long, but the reality is that we're living in ignorance out there in the field. With the exception of the handful of folks that sit here and a couple of more proactive agencies, you're not getting the message across. So you want to be successful, find a way to communicate. You only have how many paramedics in this region? How many paramedics are practicing in the Remo region?
Jessica?
Ballpark.
I don't have that number.
1,000?
That's
No, but I
somewhere
agree. I think
around
an email went out to the agencies and the agency directors or.
It never made it to the
and-
personnel.
And I think a lot of it has fallen through the cracks because
Yeah.
it's the same thing. They'll show up and I'll ask. 'Cause
So why
obviously
can't-
I wear both hats as a paramedic and a nurse, and a lot of them, they don't know what FastED is.
They have no idea, and it never makes it to
Don't
them.
know how to use it, or they have said before, there was a bug in there that was sending to the wrong hospitals there for a little while.
Yeah.
Remember, we did that?
Yeah,
We sat,
the
you and I sat,
yeah.
literally sat next to each
Mhm.
other, put the same stuff in, and it sent us to two different hospitals.
So in order to be a credentialed paramedic in the Remo region, you have to have a 3-digit number or a 4-digit number. I guess you transferred to 4 digits now. But either way, you've got contact information, whether it's an email, whether it's a phone number for a text message, or whether it's just a street address. You have to have your information here. Why can't we send out an email blast? I don't understand why.
Can we put it on, is there any way to put an advisory on like,
It's wonderful that he just came
where
back.
we get our control numbers,
Oh, if you get, yeah, but there are so many paper paramedics who are almost never practicing in the field.
yeah, but I think it would help a little bit.
It would absolutely help a little bit, but I don't understand why we
Especially
can't.
for those
If we
ones
have
who are
contact
practicing.
information, send it out to them more proactively instead of passively. You send it
I
out
still think
passively,
there
we're
should be an
never gonna
education
look
on
at it.
I think there should be CME, I think there should be something.
CME is passive too. You can't compel people to come to that CME unless you do it like the state
But
did
it's
a number of
better
years
than-
ago.
It's better than what's going on right now.
Absolutely, which is nothing. That's my point. It's nothing. So
think-
if you've got the contact information, use it. I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead. I didn't mean to step on you.
First, Gio, I think you raised a very valid, important point. I think there's a communication deficit that we have, not only at the paramedic level, but at all provider levels. It exists at the state, and it exists in regions. The state is not got the mechanism to solve the problem yet, but I think we do have the mechanism to solve the problem at the region. And I think it makes sense to try and solve it first at the highest level where there's the most risk and sophistication and also smaller numbers. I don't see any reason why this organization, whether it be through the Remac, the REMSCO, or just simply Remo, cannot build as part of the credentialing process a communication list, whether it be mail and email for all providers in the region, and we exercise the use of it for important things. I mean, the reality is we're never going to get everyone to come. It's very hard to get everyone to come to a CME on any particular topic. It's not hard for us to go through the exercise of building an email list and keeping it current that has all the paramedic providers on it. And at times like this, we communicate with them.
There you go, Tim.
It's a heavy lift, but, I mean, it'll take a while.
It's a heavy lift and will take a while, but there's no question what Gio said is true. We are not getting the communication through because we're counting on a third party, which is agency directors, to make a decision as to what gets communicated. And I do not believe it's out of malice, but when you're up to your neck in the swamp, it's hard to remember that you had a memo that you were supposed to put out. And so I think many agencies do, but many don't. This year, we've started a newsletter here at the REMSCO for the first time, or for the first time in a lot of years. So we're trying to put things out in new ways, and I think this is a good one for us to consider. So we should take a shot at it.
And And I think
records
the
and-
advantage of doing it electronically is you can make a little, very short podcast, and I mean short, if you're gonna do something like that, it's gotta.
Oh, there's a million different ways to electronically do it, whether it's a,
Hyperlink in.
right, whether it's an attached Google form that somebody has to actually click that I have read the above and I understand it or whatever. There's ways to track it, and that's honestly where you're gonna fall down, is unless you have the enforcement and the tracking part of it there. If you send out a passive email, I'm gonna delete your email all day long.
Well, I think that's what happened, is I think the email went out to the directors, and
Yeah,
they
it
probably
never made it to us.
forwarded it off
Yeah.
to their employee list, and
Nope.
it's done. Well, that's how I.
Like I
got
said,
it.
I work for so many different agencies. If I didn't sit here, I wouldn't even know
Well,
Fast
that's
TV
why you're
existed.
seeing some using it and some not.
Right.
So this is about culture change, right? We traditionally have not, as a region, been pushing information directly out to providers. Providers have no expectation of directly receiving information from the regional organization or from the Remac. You have to start someplace. You start by getting that information out towards people. Then there's strategies we can talk about making sure people read it.
Right.
But the first step is you gotta be putting it out.
Mhm.
And, you know, there are CME products out there that can verify that someone has opened the video and watched it. Maybe that's down the road in our future. But let's first start by simply making sure we're pushing it out and the right people are receiving it.
You're welcome. Sorry.
Any more discussion on FCD?
Just one question. We had talked at a meeting a few months ago about the neuro.
Guys, can we keep the background conversation, can't even hear
They have to be on both, and they're always.
We had talked a few months ago with the neuroservice, with Dr. Brooks, who came from Ellis, et cetera. Are we still planning on sort of having a revisit of the whole FAST ED embrace that we made, and whether it's still something we want to continue to embrace, especially based on some of this discussion just now, and are we going to invite other people from various healthcare systems in our region to come to that meeting to have a discussion about neuro? We are.
But I think what we're gonna do first, Sam, is get data. And that's what we said at the end of the meeting with Dr. Brooks. Let's get data. Let's find out how many patients you're losing, but more importantly, let's find out whether or not we're getting
But our
patients
next
the right
meeting is
choice.
September, right?
Right. And
So-
that gives us some time to actually collect some data.
But what I'm saying is, are we gonna need another meeting before we start inviting people to talk with amongst ourselves, or are we gonna invite people to that meeting? That's what I'm asking.
I would be very surprised if by September, we were in a position to be able to bring out anything, because, you know, we're looking at implementing something that'll work within the Mission Lifeline program to give us an additional layer to look at what we're at the data, and we won't even get approval of that until the fall. So through the summer, it'll just be Mission Lifeline. But remember, the stroke coordinators sitting there looking at at a small subset of this information on a regular basis.
No, but we said at one of the meetings, Mike, that we were gonna take the data that was out in the field that we could gather from our region, once we had put FAST out there, and have some preliminary data to discuss, to bring back the meeting in September and talk about it with other representatives from healthcare systems around our region. That was kind of the
Plan
discussion.
was we'd have about 6 months of data,
Right.
we'd have some time where it's time to digest it, have at least something preliminary to put out of, this is what's
So,
going on.
I mean, I'm just asking the question if we're still planning on doing that, especially in light of this last couple of minutes of discussion regarding the FAST exam.
I think it would be reasonable to do, because if we're frankly failing, we need to know. We need to know. The biggest question is going to be whether or not we can get good data. But we'll have to try, and we'll have to work with the Mission Lifeline folks and see if they can bring it to us. Maybe that's the best answer. See if they can come and present to us in September.
Yeah. I don't know how they're gonna have our
They'll only have data.
run
through-
data and outcomes, I don't know.
They will
how-
only have data through June.
Well,
and
that's
they probably
okay.
will only have
6 months of
really
data.
reviewed what's
Put it in
what's come back
in
through March.
January.
But
That's
it's
okay.
something.
Well, just for planning purposes, that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah. I think it's reasonable. I mean, I'm not trying to set your agenda, Rob, but I think that's a,
Well, I think we already set the agenda
Yeah,
to last meeting.
yeah.
that's what we talked about at the last meeting, but if we're gonna postpone that, that's okay, I'm just asking. And maybe you can decide on that later and
I
let
think we should
everybody
probably have
know.
something with whatever data we have. It may not be fully publishable data yet, but I think putting something out, we've been doing it, we would have at least 6 months of doing it to see if, at least if we could show that, 80% of your patients aren't going somewhere else or something like that, and most of the patients we're getting are appropriate versus we had 2 strokes and 40 complex migraines. So I think we should probably do something in September, then we can discuss further after that.
We made the promise, so we have to do it.
Yeah.
But also my academic side is also saying, we know this data is not good, because we also know it's not being used.
Yeah.
So on one side I'm saying, let's do it, but my researcher side is saying, this is crap data.
Oh, yeah, same.
Some is crap data. Some is just data, but unfortunately it looks like crap. Those are two very different things.
I would say, plan on presenting something. If it comes out that everything is completely non-usable, then we can apologize and postpone until the next meeting. But I would still plan on September. IV nitro?
We've only taken care of 3 patients so far, which is good, because we didn't expect that we would be taking care of any more than that in that amount of time. The nitro each time has been administered exactly the way it was supposed to be, and has had exactly the results we've hoped it would. Keeping patients on CPAP, being able to give them nitrates at the doses that we had already previously reviewed, doing that intravenously has been really successful for the 3 patients we've taken care of so far. So I only have thumbs up to offer on that project.
I do apologize, there was some correspondence that I forgot after the medical directors. Landmark, many you're familiar with, has begun working with Colony and some other agencies, and to be able to give them direction for caring for their patients on scene. They have put several of their physicians through the base station course. The understanding is that they will direct for the, I don't want to say the landmark level care, but the care that the patient can receive on scene will follow their medical direction. If it becomes a patient needs to be transported, they'll revert over to their usual medical direction. Is that about the way it's going?
Yep.
So I have 4 doctors: Heidi Rasmussen, Richard Bowler, Vasantha Natarajan, and Francine Reno. Any questions or discussion on that? Yeah, I think that was just an FYI, because they went through the base station course. Town Catskill Ambulance is substituting 7.5% bicarb for 8.4% due to the back order. And sorry, that's it from our correspondence. Any new business? Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?